Welcome back to Alyssa's Movie Takes. If you are new to the channel, I welcome you here. I do movie and TV reviews and think pieces from a Christian perspective. So feel free to check out some of the other content, like, share, subscribe, and welcome. So today we're going to talk about what's the deal with revival. The film Jesus Revolution made a splash at the box office the last few weeks, garnering more than $40 million and counting. The movie is based on the true story of the Jesus movement, where thousands of people, especially hippies and other young people, came to Christ in the early 1970s. To learn more about that movie, feel free to check out my latest video on Alyssa's Movie Takes, catch it in theaters, or take a look at Joseph Holmes' review. Joseph is joining me today on Religion Unplugged. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the idea that's buzzing all around Christian circles these days: revival. What is revival? How do we really know that we're in one? How do we know it's from God? And does Jesus Revolution give us a model or a warning about revival? So joining me for this in-depth look at Jesus Revolution and revival are two of my very good friends, Karen Laing and Joseph Holmes. Karen Laing is the discipleship and outreach specialist for Christian organizations with Justice for Orphans based in the Capital Region of New York. They connect churches and businesses to kids in need. She has a master's in theology, a bachelor's in public health, and she's the author of several books on skills for the everyday Christian and also books on healthy living. She's also a mom of four, two boys, two girls, because that's the way that she asked them for them, God for them. And then she has an almost 4-year-old granddaughter. So welcome, Karen.
Hi, thank you.
And Joseph Holmes is a New York City-based film critic and filmmaker. He is the co-host of the Overthinkers podcast. It's the one with the light bulb. You can find it on any podcast platform. The Overthinkers is also a fun Facebook group for those who enjoy thinking deeply. And he is a writer, director, and thoughtful analyst extraordinaire. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you so much. You give great intros.
Well, Joseph gives really good introductions too, so I had to kind of match him in order to do it on this show. So let's start with the basics. Karen, you saw Jesus Revolution most recently. Joseph and I ended up seeing a pre-screening. So I'm wondering, as you watch it, as you see what's going on with Asbury, what is revival and how do we know that we're in one?
You know, revival is just God bringing himself back to the church and getting us energized and invigorated and back on track with his game plan for our lives. And in a bigger setting, you can almost have a personal revival, a one-on-one with God, but this is more of a bigger setting kind of a thing. And it's certainly clear, you know, in the Jesus Revolution as sort of the non-Christians start to search out God. That's not actually revival, that's salvation. But you see sort of a revival in Jesus Revolution with the older generation suddenly looking at the younger generation and wanting to be involved in that level of depth of relationship. You also see some of them walk away from it. But revival is really, truly about God turning his people back to him. And as a result of that, you get a salvation spread as well that happens because all of a sudden we're all reignited into how wonderful God is. And we start telling people about it, like we were supposed to be doing all along. And then you get the salvation follow-up kind of piece.
Joseph, would you have a slightly different definition of revival? How would you define revival?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds pretty on point to me. I mean, you know, like Dr. Yoon Shin just did a piece for the Biblical Mind website, which is a good website that's about just trying to get a bunch of authors and speakers to kind of about how to think biblically from you know, the Hebrew text, Hebrew languages and things like that. But they had a Pentecostal kind of scholar do it. It was basically kind of that way. She's saying that it's people, you know, God working, his God spirit comes down into a Christian community at a particular time and revives their devotion to him, and that and the spreading that causes. Typically, culturally, when most people talk about revival, they don't call things revival until they see a spread around to the culture. You know, okay. so like typically, and that's, we talk about the Great Awakenings. They talk about even like Jesus Revolution, Jesus movement. It's like, okay, you're starting to see a bunch of, the hippies get saved. So typically, when most people colloquially are talking about revival, they don't just mean that individuals or even just one church or a bunch of Christians are saying that our devotion is increasing to God. But we're starting to see it spread around, and a culture is and not just a community, but a culture is starting to revive. A culture that was Christian starts to become Christian again. And so I would think that, I think you're Karen, you're right technically, but also we have to include the colloquial kind of understanding of revival. When people are talking about it, that's usually what they mean.
Okay.
True. And I think that use of that Great Awakenings is a good word. So I think there's revival, which starts in the church, which is truly what revival is and means. And then there's the awakening into the community around it that comes next. So I think too often we blend the two as one, and they're actually, step one, step two.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that would sound likely for the English language, that we would start conflating separate.
To start judging this revival on the fact that there isn't sort of the Great Awakening piece yet, because we're still in the revival piece. So it's important that we define it correctly so that we know where we are and we can watch for the next step,
Sure. No, good point.
So Karen, you saw Jesus Revolution recently. And you have thoughts about how this might be actually somewhat of a warning, and also why the timing of it might have been released so close to Asbury, not necessarily on a natural level, but from God's perspective. So go ahead and talk about that.
Right. So what I was really struck with was really, as the Asbury revival was moving into its second week, how much criticism was coming out of, let's call it the Christian old guard. My generation, I'm in my 50s, even some older, some a little bit younger. Is this a real revolution? Is this a real revival? Is this really happening? Is this how God responds? Revivals are really about outreach, and this is all internal, all of that kind of stuff. And so the first few days of the Asbury revival, you saw people really excited, and then you started seeing the criticisms and the critiques. And immediately upon the critiques coming out comes the Jesus Revolution movie. And in that, you see the young people being genuinely saved, and you see the old guard fighting back, right? They're coming in their bare feet and they're ruining our rugs, and it was just very much felt like, lay off. God is God. Gets to decide how he's going to bring revival and how it's going to look in the next generation. And the older generation needs to stand back and let it happen and not be critical of it.
And you said that there's a difference and a contrast between the young people then and the young people now.
Most of the people that are complaining about this particular version of the revival are people who were part of the Jesus Revolution. And so it feels very much like they kind of get to relive their life, but I think it's also pulling them back to a point where they're just being saved, and they're realizing, hey, just because I've been standing in this faith for 50 years doesn't mean there isn't a move of God in the young people. There should be a move of God in the young people, and it should be coming out this way. And God is answering this revival. It looks different because the culture is different. In the 60s, the culture was the drugs and the alcohol and the, and people dying of overdoses and things like that. That is not happening in this generation. This generation is addicted to pot, and it's full of depression and fear and anxiety. So God is not coming in the same way. He's coming in with peace. He's coming in with his presence to relieve the anxiety, to relieve the depression, to relieve the trauma of the last few years. He doesn't have to come in with loud, joyous music. He can come in softly and gently, because that's what this generation needs.
Joseph, what were your thoughts on this movie, particularly with revival? And is revival something that we should be looking for, or should we be looking for something else?
Yeah, so this is interesting because yeah, I definitely saw when the Asbury revival stuff broke out. I did a tweet because I about like, that was basically this degree of the Asbury revival is not a genuine revival unless they immediately start focusing on all of my priorities. Because that's what I saw from a lot of the Twitter discourse, which I thought was very dumb. Um, but on the other hand, I definitely kind of related to the sort of skeptical kind of wait and see kind of stance of a lot of people taking, because I definitely see a lot in the Christian community of sort of kind of a over promising around revival and kind of over marketing things as revival. And I sort of saw that with Jesus Revolution, because you talk about sort of the conflating of revival and awakenings, and I sort of saw that with the marketing of Jesus Revolution, the movie, and within the Jesus Revolution movie itself, the the directors would always be coming out and giving interviews and saying, this, we're in a very similar place right now than we were back then. We have had a divided country then, and we had young people leaving the faith, and we have the same things now. And so we're looking back on this old revival that happened and saying, well, maybe we can look at what they did then, and it can give us hope for solving those problems today. And, I looked at that movie, I watched that movie, and I look at the sort of the data around. And so they're promising a couple things. One, they're promising, culture to reverse the trend of young people leaving the church, and they're promising to, kind of have a cultural renewal where we're solving certain social ailments in the society. And they do that within the movie, where because they create like going back to screenwriting 101 here, they set up the conflict, and the conflict is, and when they're looking at the TV screens and saying, look at society, what's going on, and then with the individuals of the characters' lives to set that conflict. And so, okay, what they're promising, and they're promising the marketing. And if you look at the data on the Jesus movement, not to kind of poo-poo all the people who were saved, but they were, if you look at the rates of people being identifying as Christians, started going down, again. It was been going down for 500 years, but it started going down again in the 1960s. And the 1970s was not even a bump up. There was no, or even a stop in the rates of going down of people identifying as Christians. Perhaps we can say that the Jesus Revolution slowed the descent into secularism, but it didn't make a difference in terms of of reversing that trend. And certainly there's little evidence that the Jesus Revolution was the cause of renewing sort of cultural renewal. In terms of healing the divided country. There were a lot of other factors that seemed like they were more powerful in terms of, changing how the culture at large, how the political divisions got resorted. So I think that, Jesus Revolution, I kind of think it's dishonest about, what the Jesus movement actually did or didn't do, and therefore what looking back on it as a model could promise. And I'll go a step further, because I do in the article, and you kind of teed me up for this, Alyssa, is the fact that typically revivals, while they are good at, people who are, Christians, sort of giving them a new passion for their faith, or sometimes, like let's say, Great Awakenings, the Second Great Awakening, dealing with social ills. Like the First Great Awakening helped, to set the table for the American Revolution, and the Second Great Awakening helped to, deal with the cultural issue of slavery. But in terms of reversing secularism, which is one thing that Christians kind of are always saying, this is we need revival to reverse secularism. The rates just keep going down. They sometimes bump up a little bit when you have a Great Awakening, but then the church doesn't retain any of those members they give, the next generation. So, I think that people who are asking, so you look at these different things, like Tim Keller comes out with a piece in Atlantic that says we're due for the Christian West is due for revival, and they're doing things like that. Everyone's saying, okay, they're asking revival to reverse secularism and they're looking for an awakening, like you said, they're looking for, but even the awakenings didn't do that. The Awakenings didn't reverse the tide of secularism. And so I kind of look at this and I'm saying, I think revivals are great, but I think what most people are asking for from revivals have never historically delivered for the past 500 years. And so, maybe if we're looking to solve those problems, we should look at how do we plug the holes of church retention. Instead, that doesn't seem to be affected by revival. And so I kind of come from the opposite end. I think our Christian community focuses too much on revival and not enough on, if you look at the wineskin analogy, you have, everyone, revival is the wine, and everyone's saying, just pour more wine into the wineskin, when we really should be focusing on, hey, we've got a leaky wineskin, maybe patch those holes or get a new wineskin, because otherwise, no matter how much wine you put in, it's just going to leak out. And that's what's happening with church retention. So that's kind of my worry about a lot of this discourse.
Okay. Go ahead, Karen, respond.
So interesting enough, because as you're talking about this, and I'm realizing that there was a shift after the Jesus Revolution, not so much into Christianity, but an opening of spirituality. So you see a rise in yoga and Eastern religions and Wicca and those kinds of things coming into the country. So I do think that the Jesus Revolution, to some extent or another, awakened a desire for spirituality. And I'm going to go back to my warning. I think because the old guard didn't really allow it as fully as God would have liked it, they scrunched it, and then people were left kind of going back and forth. And I see that to some extent with Lonnie Frisbee's story, where, he's really what's drawing all those young people. And then the fear of the Holy Spirit and the movement of that prophetic, it gets shut down, and he wanders away and kind of gets lost again. And although he travels to Florida, and the Times report says that it traveled from California to Florida, so you kind of see it going with him across the lower part of the country. Over and over and over again, I'm imagining he's going to get shut down again. And that's part of the reason why I think it is a warning. Like, there's so much spirituality. If you talk to a young person now, they'll tell you they're not religious, but they're spiritual. They've got a relationship with God, but it's the God they've created. That he's good with. My daughter uses all the time. Me and God, we're good with each other. He knows where I stand. He knows where like, that's not true Christianity. It's a nice spirituality thought. It's not Christianity. And I think that's because we did it. Like, as Christians, we're very judgmental of each other, of the world, of everything else. I just had this conversation today with somebody, and I said, Jesus went up to people and said, "Hi, I'm Jesus. I like you. What's going on? Have a conversation, have some healing." Then he says, "Yeah, don't sin anymore." Right? Sure. We start with, "You're a sinner." And that's the way to start.
Well, so I want to push back just a little bit on that. You look at the, you're kind of, it sounds like what you're saying is that, the Christians, the stuffy conservative Christians were too afraid and put too tight a handle on, kind of letting the Spirit move, were too judgmental. And so the work that, people like Lonnie Frisbee did to open up people who were looking for a place that wasn't going to be judgmental on them was kind of shut down. And my problem with that narrative is that it's, when you look at church membership, it is sort of the friendly and least judgmental denominations that are shrinking the fastest. It's the conservative evangelical ones that are maintaining their membership, the stuffy old guard ones, and they're not doing great. I mean, they're not growing, like, let's not pretend it's going well. But like the ones that are more welcome, opening, and accepting of people in a variety of ways tend to be the ones that are shrinking. And of course, you get like the sort of the Pentecostal charismatic ones that have, get kind of growth initially, but they have just complete turnover. Like, they don't retain people. So it seems like that may be a bad thing that, the stuffy conservatives shouldn't do, but that's clearly not the reason why that people are leaving.
Right. So some of it is that those denominations that are the warm, fuzzy, opening, affirming, and they're crashing miss the part where Jesus said, go and don't sin anymore.
Sure.
Like they're warm and welcoming and affirming, and they're leaving people in their sin.
Sure.
And if you're living in sin, you're automatically feeling disconnected to
Sure.
God. And so eventually going to church doesn't make any difference because you're not feeling a connection to God, you know? And I think the same thing of those really evangelical, Pentecostal, you know, the Holy Spirit is flying in the room.
Yeah.
So probably not as much as people are trying to make him fly in the room. You're getting the wow and the pizzazz that draws people, but again, you're not getting that deep connection to God.
Sure.
You know, my faith is not based on anything that happens in a church building on a Sunday morning. It's what happens on Monday morning when I get up.
Sure.
And I still need to deal with me and God. And I think that's what both sides are missing.
Sure. Yeah, they're not getting the balance right, so to speak.
They're not getting the balance right.
Fair enough.
So some of the reason they're not getting the balance right is because we become judgmental of each other, right? Like we want to exclude, you know, and my role in the community is to put different denominations together and have them work together to care for needs. So when I can get a very Catholic church and a United Methodist church and a Pentecostal church to serve together and to talk to each other about their reactions and how they see God moving and that kind of stuff, there's a blend there. There's a merging there of the different pieces, the good and the bad. And that we go back to that concept of iron sharpens iron. You start to see all the rough edges from all of the different denominations rub away, and you start to see the real value of all of them.
So you would say, like, you know, and I wouldn't have minded if the movie portrayed it like this. You would say, in a sense, the Jesus Revolution movie was not an inspirational story, but like a tragedy. And the tragic point was like Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee not being able to iron out their differences, and instead there became a split. And so there's that would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, I think the movie was supposed to be inspirational because it really ultimately focuses on Greg Laurie, who is a well-known mega church pastor.
Yes.
Does seem in all, I mean, I've watched some of his followings and seen some of his stuff. He does seem to really have that deep heart connection to God and desire for everybody else to do it. I think in a lot of ways he does it well.
And he just also desires to write a movie about himself where his mentors tell him how awesome he is.
Yes. You know what? I'm pretty sure that was driven by God to answer the issues that are coming up in this revival. I really do. I had there not been this Asbury revival happening at the same time, I would completely go with you on that statement. That was just a power play on him. But I really do believe that God called him to do that, to try to teach us to let it go. To let God move with the young generation the way they want to, so they keep their faith, so they have the things that they need, so they can connect with God, right? And I think you see the leadership at Asbury very much manage that well. As
it seems like they are. That's again, I will say about Asbury in particular, you know, that again, I'm on the wait and see fence of, like, you know, again, we'll know it by its fruits, and like right now, you know, all we've seen is a worship service, but everybody there has been like not falling into the traps that these typically fall into when they go bad, and like the leadership is managing it well, and every single person from, you know, who disagree with each other on everything that I've seen that have gone to the Asbury revival says, like, there's something real going on here. It's it. And so like, I'm willing to say that definitely is true.
Yeah. And I think, you know, judge it by its fruits is a good concept, but we also need to remember the part where Jesus says, you know, he sows the seed onto good ground and hard rocky places and pathways. So because some of the people don't show fruit doesn't mean that wasn't God's fruit, right?
Oh no.
that's what we're starting to see. Well, how many people are going to? I had one woman post a comment on her Facebook page. She'd been very pro the Asbury revival. Just wanting it and look at God moving and everything else. And then she posts one day, well, I heard one of the worship leaders is still living in unrepentant sin, and so I can't support this anymore. And I'm not sure, but I'm going to not say anything until I know for sure whether or not.
Yeah.
And responded to her. I've known her for years, and I responded to her and I said, why are you spreading rumors? And she said, I'm not spreading rumors. I said, you don't know whether or not he's still living in unrepentant sin, so you're spreading a rumor. And she said, you're a bully.
Yeah,
like, I don't. No, but okay. Sorry you feel bullied. I feel like if that is your thought process, stop posting about the Asbury revival and let's see the fruits of it. But if 50 people come out of unrepentant sin and one guy is still living there, I got news for you. God showed up at that revival, even with that guy living in sin. And he's saying, even with that guy living in sin. So clearly, God is not, you might like that guy to come out of unrepentant sin, but it's not stopping the revival movement. So why should it stop your being supported?
So Karen and Joseph, there is a major problem facing Christianity, and this plays into the boom and bust cycle of revival. So basically, Christianity is declining, at least in the West. And there's two problems with that when you break it down. So first, young people are leaving the faith. And second, women outnumber the men in church. So in a Pew Research study, there showed that women are more likely to see religion as important in their lives, pray daily, or attend church. So what does a sustainable move of God look like in our day? And Joseph, I'll start with you.
So I'll give my answer so that you can then, Karen, you can give sort of your more expert answer after I give my sort of skeptical answer. I don't think historically revival has solved either of those problems. I think I think that again once you look at funny enough in the first and second Great Awakenings, the men would leave the revival first. The revival could bring in men, but men would leave the revival first, and then sort of women would follow after that. And there's a part of me that kind of wonders if it's causative, because I was reading in a book recently of Boys and Men, fact that colleges are quietly doing affirmative action for men because men are not graduating high school, so there's fewer men going to college. But if too few men go to college, then women don't want to go to that college either. And so, I wonder if there's an element of the fact that the churches are shrinking in membership, the fact that since so few men are being dedicated there, women are sort of following them out. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's something I've been considering lately. But, what my kind of philosophy is the fastest growing religion in the world right now is not Christianity, it's Islam. And the reason for that is not a secret. It's because, Muslims have a lot of children, and those children stay Muslim. And if you talk about sort of the issue of secularization of society, atheists don't have children. Like, they don't have many children. So like if Christians could just figure out how to not let their children not leave, then we would outbreed secularism within a few generations. Without a revival, we wouldn't even need a revival if we could just not stop, plug the holes, and people and so for me, that's sort of the crisis factor is I wish that half of the energy that was going into praying for revival was going into trying to ask the question, solve the problem of why is it that children leave the faith after their parents, and a data-driven one, saying like, okay, what works and what doesn't, what would we see work, what happens with the parents who do versus the parents that doesn't, rather than anecdotal kind of experiences. I think that's where our energy should be focused, even though praying for revival is a great thing. I mean, if we had both revival and retention, that would just be an incredible thing. Again, I haven't seen revival historically solve either of those problems. And so I don't think revival is sort of the answer to solving them. And again, it's certainly the Jesus revolution, is not if we were going to use something as a model for that, Jesus revolution wouldn't be the one, because at least the Great Awakenings had a slight uptick in people coming back to church and it growing before losing everyone. And Jesus Revolution didn't even do that. I'll have to cop out and say I don't know what the answer is to how to plug the holes. I think that, you know, Karen has some good answers of like trying to find that middle balance of like allowing freedom of expression in church and allowing, you know, allowing the right brain and the left brain to flourish in church, you know, having a combination of truth and grace. I don't know quite how that looks in practice. I also kind of, like I indicated, you know, there is some data. There's, you know, a few articles out there around some studies from 2011, I think, that say that, you know, if the father takes the children to church, then they will stay, or like 30% more likely to stay, whereas the mother, it's like there's no shift. It doesn't make a difference. And so I think maybe having a much more intense, like figuring out the problem, why don't men go to church, is maybe sort of a place where we could focus our energy. I will also say this just very briefly, because we're talking about Jesus Revolution. I've made this point before. The Jesus Revolution appealed to women over the age of 34. You know, that's the demographic that's largely of the movie. Yeah, Jesus Revolution movie. Yes, appeals. That's the demographic that went to see the movie and is really excited about it. The 18 to 34 male demographic went to see Ant-Man, Quantumania, you know, Cocaine Bear, and Creed 3. So, like, as somebody who's interested in the film industry, I'm so like, how do we make Christian movies that men want to go see? Because right now, Christian men don't like to go see Christian movies, or particularly young men. And so it's like, okay, I'm trying to solve that problem. And is there a vision for Christianity that can excite that audience, so to speak? But that's sort of where I come from it, but I don't have concrete answers on what the actual answer would be. I'm just sort of skeptical on revival from the historical perspective. But that's where as far as I go with it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that because I know that you think about that a lot. So
that's my problem now solution. Karen's going to explain why. Yes.
Yes. So let's talk about some of those issues. So if we go to the sort of the ultimate revival, the moment of very few, or the ultimate awakening, it's after Jesus dies and is resurrected, right? And you see Peter going out that first day and 3,000 people joining, and that very start of the Bible, the book of Acts and all of that, right? None of that addresses the political climate and the problems going on in society. None of it. Doesn't change the fact that the Romans are in power. Nowhere that Paul goes does he change the government. God is not really interested in our government and our secular world. He's interested in our people, but he's not coming in to change our government world. That was quite clear by the fact that that's what Jews expected, and that's not what Jesus did, right? So I think the current revival is still not going to fix our government problems. Now, it may get enough people actively praying and seeking God that God will move to fix the slavery issue or to shift into some of those things. But I don't think you're going to see a whole community change in that way, because that's just historically all the way back to the very first revival and awakening, not what happens, right? So if we talk about the wine and the wineskin, I think that God brings revival in to bring in a new wineskin, because he's tired of patching holes. And unfortunately, I think that what happens is those that were holding on to the old wineskins poke holes in the new wineskins. And I think that in that way, they undermine what God is doing. I think that if we don't become, as the body of Christ, less judgmental about each other, less judgmental about sinners, less judgmental about the world, and we just start going out and loving people and sharing that I was this way, you know, this was my life, and God came in and I'm better now, and God can make your life better now, we're going to miss it all over again. It's not going to make any difference. And on my last thought, that study that you looked at from 2011 about men taking their children to school was just actually redone recently. And single fathers taking their children to church have a higher percentage of children who retain their faith than even married couples taking
Wow.
their children to church. And I tend to believe that's because the husband's going because the wife goes.
Sure. Yeah.
I think you're still seeing it driven by the woman.
Yeah.
But it's starting to become more apparent.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think that that a lot of that is because we don't give men in the Christian denomination the right to still be men. Right.
Yeah.
We don't want them to be loud or aggressive or demonstrative or we want them to be able to spend their time at church with the women instead of doing the job that they love. And we all have different skill sets.
Sure.
And if we could honor the skill sets and the way God made men, I think we would do so much better at making a church that draws men. I just came out of a church where most of the church members are men. I've never seen anything like that before. Single guys are coming to our church, flocking to our church.
Wow.
It's harder to find women than men.
Wow.
You
have to tell me what that church is. That's a study. That's a place to study.
And the pastor is he's very down to earth. He doesn't do like deep, in-depth philosophical sermons. He's very basic. Most of his sermons involve comments about Spider-Man or the latest Marvel movie. But not like you see some of the big mega churches where like they get the whole theme out of it. Right. It's his life. It oozes out all of his faults and flaws and good things and bad things. And I think that draws men. I think that when men sit in a church with particularly a male pastor who's like, well, I have it all together, it intimidates them. Because none of us really have it all together, And so I think we need to get human. We need to get real. We need to be able to say to somebody, this is why I go to church. I don't go to church because my mother made me go to church. I don't go to church because my neighbor told me to go to church. I go to church because I have a relationship with God and it makes a difference. And when I meet with everybody on a Sunday morning or a Saturday afternoon or a Friday night or whenever my service is, I feel renewed and restored and ready to take on my week and to be a better person on Monday. And I think that comes from, that will be real revival. When we see people able to actually do those things and not pretend that they're okay on Friday when they're not, or Sunday when they're not, and not pretend to be okay on Monday when they're not, because what drives our children out is that falseness. Is that they saw on Friday when we melted down, when we lost our job and got our pay cut. And then we go to church on Sunday and somebody says, how's everything going? And we're like, we're good. And the kids are like, you're lying.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Right. And I think that we don't do a good job of being real in the church building. And that's what throws our kids out faster than anything else. The single dads are very real in a church building. They really are very honest about the good, the bad, the ugly, the nasty. Any single father I have ever met in a church is usually the most honest person in the building. My life sucks. My children did that. Whatever it is, but they're willing to take the advice and they'll still say, but God got me through it, or like they're not acknowledging God, but they're the most truthful people in the building every single time. And if we could all learn that truth, I think we'd all do much better.
All right. This has been a lot of fun. I'm going to wrap us up for time's sake. Karen and Joseph, thank you for joining me. Joseph, where can people find you?
They can find me at the overthinkersjournal.com. They can go where I'm again doing all the Overthinkers podcasts. We can have a lot of conversations. You find a lot of conversations like this on there. You can also find on Apple Podcasts like Alyssa said, it's the Upside Down Light Bulb Overthinkers. You can also find my reviews I do of movies and my culture critiques at religionunplugged.com. Just look up Religion Unplugged, Joseph Holmes. Also on Relevant Magazine, I have an article up on there. And also my website, josephholmesstudios.com. And you can find me on all the socials as well.
Awesome. And Karen, where can people find you?
I'm not really out like you all are.
Yes, you are. So Amazon, use Amazon.
Yes, I have a lot of books on both healthcare and faith-based, including a book that kind of addresses this called The Biblically Normal Church. And that is found and available on Amazon. Yes.
So thank you both for joining
Fantastic.
me. That is our take on Jesus Revolution and a deep dive into revival. I want to know from you guys in the comments, what do you think about revival? What is it going to take for this new wine to come into place, or first not to leak out the wine that's coming in? Do we need a new wineskin, or do we just to patch the holes? What do you think about Jesus Revolution? Let me know in the comments below, and I will talk to you soon.